Lived in by royalty, heads of state and church, palaces are designed to be lavish, to blatantly flaunt the wealth of their well-heeled residents. But arguably, the most iconic palace on the planet is also, comparatively, one of the more modest. Smack bang in the heart of London, England, is one of the principal residences of the British royal family. Buckingham Palace. Built in 1703, Buckingham Palace presents more like a small town than a private home. There are 775 rooms inside the palace. 240 royal, guest and staff bedrooms, 78 bathrooms, 92 offices and 19 opulent staterooms, which are open to the public when the Queen is not in residence. Banquets, by invitation only, are held in the largest room in the palace, the 18-metre wide by 36.6 metre long ballroom. Setting the table for a state dinner can take up to 5 days, utilising a selection of items drawn from the 4,000-piece silver-gilt grand service that's been in the family since George IV started the collection in the early 1800s. It includes everything from egg cups to ice pails, 140 serving dishes, 288 dinner plates, and a mind-boggling array of silverware that would challenge even those well-versed in the language of cutlery. One enduring tradition at Buckingham Palace that's guaranteed to turn even the saddest crown upside down is the changing of the guard. Witnessed by millions every year, the ceremony is as iconic as the palace itself, and just as indelibly linked to the British monarchy, dating back to the reign of King Henry VII in the 15th century. Originally held at Whitehall Palace, the convention made its way to Buckingham Palace when Queen Victoria made it her court in 1837. The ceremony has evolved over the years, as have the costumes worn by participating sentries. The uniforms, which vary subtly depending on the officer's station, are the same as those worn by soldiers on active duty several centuries ago. Rumour has it that bright red was chosen for their battle dress since it hid unsightly blood stains that were not good for company morale. But the real reason is far more pragmatic. The dye was readily available and cheap. The bearskin hats, introduced in the 19th century, are likely to be replaced in the near future with caps made from synthetic fur. As more and more people shun the use of animal pelts in fashion, the last thing the royal family needs is to fall out of step with the times. Ever conscious of maintaining their relevance and appeal, the full military band that performs at every ceremony now plays a mix of traditional marches, show tunes and pop songs, which fans can readily download on Spotify. A second highly anticipated convention that takes place at Buckingham Palace on the occasion of major anniversaries and events is the Royal Balcony Appearance. Queen Victoria was the first monarch to initiate the practice, greeting her subjects from this elevated post on several occasions, but most significantly in 1858, on the day of her daughter Princess Victoria's wedding, establishing a tradition that never fails to wow the crowds. As a backdrop to the marriage of a Prince Charming and his princess, Buckingham Palace is fairy tale perfect. So, let's hope that this tale has a happy ending. In palatial terms, Buckingham Palace is relatively small. So, to appreciate a true monarchical megastructure, the avid royal watcher makes their way to the Spanish capital of Madrid. And the largest functioning palace in contemporary Europe, the Royal Palace. With a whopping 135,000 square meters of floor space, the Royal Palace is at least 1,000 times bigger than your average home in the capital. Which is probably why the current monarch, King Felipe VI, and his family choose to live elsewhere, only using the official royal residence for state ceremonies. Built during the 18th century, it took over 100 years to decorate and features the work of many great artists summoned from near and far by Charles III, the first monarch to settle in the palace in 1764. Their portraits and frescoes remain among the most important treasures within the oversized residence. Particularly the collection of oils painted by Goya, an official royal portraitist. And this work, entitled The Glory of Spain, a fresco by celebrated Venetian artist Giambattista Tiepolo, which fills the vaulted ceiling over the throne hall, completely dwarfs the furniture for which the room is currently named. The throne room was originally built as an apartment for Charles III's mother, whose likeness is etched on one of the elaborate chairs, duly guarded by 2 pairs of Medici lions. Each of the palace's 3,418 rooms served a specific purpose. Some were private chambers, while others were designed for business or pleasure, and occasionally a melding of the two. The Gasparini room, where monarchs including King Charles III, who reputedly commissioned it, were dressed, and also where they chose to meet privately with VIPs, chewing the fat beneath this superb French chandelier. The 400 square metre Royal Gala dining room, which is still used by the current King and Queen nearly every other week, is the largest room in the building. Formerly 3 rooms, which made up the private chambers of Queen Maria Amalia, it was turned into this spectacular marvel in the late 19th century, at the request of King Alfonso XII, who wanted a new room to celebrate his marriage to second wife Maria Cristina of Habsburg and Lorraine. He retained the original ceiling frescoes, the work of Rafael Mengs, Francisco Bayer Subias, and Alejandro Gonzalez, one of the sons of the famous locally born and bred Velázquez family. The table can comfortably sit 130 guests, with the king and queen traditionally sitting on either side in the middle, on ever so slightly elevated chairs, subtly referencing the superiority of their station. And given that the Spanish royals own one of the biggest palaces in Europe, it's probably safe to assume that they feel very superior indeed. While the vast majority of Europe's grand palaces were built by or for reigning royalty, some served a higher purpose. Such as the sumptuous Würzburg residence in southern Germany. Commissioned in the early 1700s by the Prince Bishop of Würzburg, Johann Philipp Franz von Schönbrunn, and his brother Friedrich Karl, the residence was reportedly the largest parsonage in Europe. As the elected rulers of the Holy Roman Empire, prince bishops had both secular and religious authority. And was the interior fit to house those who served the Almighty? Oh my God, it most certainly was. Clearly, Tiepolo was the go-to guy for frescoes, whether you were rich or religious. Creating this completely over-the-top wonder, over the top of the Grand Staircase in 1743. It's still the world's largest fresco, not quite as long as Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel, but a good 4 meters wider. Sculptures encircling the work help create the illusion that the painting itself is 3D. It depicts sagas from the 4 continents that were known to the prince bishops at the time: Europe, Africa, America, and Asia. A little closer to home, but no less magnificent, is the White Hall, or Weißer Saal, richly adorned from floor to ceiling with elaborately carved stucco. And then there's the sumptuous Garden Hall, featuring a larger-than-life fresco by Johann Zick, a master of the Rococo style. And the truly remarkable gilded stucco Spiegel Cabinet, or Mirror Hall. The 600 mirrors which mosaic the walls are painted from behind and etched in gold leaf. The priceless chandelier hanging from the ceiling came from Venice, completely encased in butter, which hardened around the fixture to protect it from damage. A practice many linguists believe gave rise to the German idiom alles in butter, which is still to this day their unique way of saying everything is A-OK. A second, decidedly un-imperial palace is located here in Porto on Portugal's northern coast. In the historical centre of Porto is a spectacular neoclassical building, commissioned not by kings or bishops, but by Porto's money merchants to house their stock exchange. It's called the Bolsa Palace. Built on the site of a former convent, the Bolsa's structure was completed in 1850, the lavish interiors in 1910. The octagonal glass-panelled dome covering the central courtyard was added in 1880, subtly illuminating the various coats of arms of Portugal and her key trading partners. Up until the mid-1990s, this was still the trading floor of the Porto Stock Exchange, but in its current incarnation, it's used to host conferences and exhibitions. Taking a daunting 40 years to sculpt and install, the grand granite staircase rises to the upper level, where the real splendor of the Palacio unfolds. Beginning with two massive bronze chandeliers which hang from the main cupola. There's the courtroom, decorated with paintings by Veloso Salgado, the General Assembly Room, and the Arab Room, the ultimate monument to commercial pride. A neo-Moorish wonder inspired by the Alhambra in Spain. Designed by Gustavo Adolfo Gonçalves e Sousa, its primary purpose was to impress, to flaunt the wealth of the Portuguese traders so they could woo potential investors. Nearly every square centimetre of wall space is decorated, intricately carved with elaborate arabesques or covered in gold leaf, the total weight of which is estimated to be around 20 kilos. Stunning porthole-like windows allow sunlight to highlight the floor, a priceless parquetry maze of mahogany, rosewood, and maple. Granted, the Palacio do Bolsa was never built for royalty, but this room was fit, if not for a king, then definitely a kingpin or two. At one point, Portugal was ruled by the House of Habsburg, a powerful dynasty whose administrative centre was, for centuries, in the Austrian capital of Vienna. Despite a couple of world wars, many of the Habsburg palaces still exist today. And none is more breathtaking than this, Schönbrunn Palace. Located in Gizeh, 5 kilometers from central Vienna, Schönbrunn Palace was commissioned by Emperor Leopold I in the latter years of the 17th century. The original building was conceived as a hunting lodge for his son, Crown Prince Joseph I, who became the King of the Romans. It was relatively modest at first, but during the reign of Maria Theresa, the only woman to ever rule the Habsburg dominions, it grew into a truly palatial wonder. Taking the throne in 1740, after the death of her father, Charles VI, Schönbrunn quickly became the focus of her court and family life. Wearing her interior designer crown, Maria Theresa set out to revamp nearly every room. If it ain't Baroque, then fix it could well have been her catch cry. The family had 3,000 servants in their employ to keep the place in tip-top shape, to gild the lily, as it were. Dusting the drapes, polishing the porcelain, and fussing with the furniture in all the staterooms to make sure they presented in the best possible light. The Great Gallery was perhaps the most vainglorious. Over 40 meters long and 10 wide, it was used for lavish receptions, balls, and banquets. It's a true celebration of the prosperity of the monarchy under the reign of Maria Theresa, complete with self-adulating ceiling frescoes, acres of white and gold stucco, gilt chandeliers, and wall candelabras that once held 2,000 candles. When the electricity was switched on in 1901, candles became passé, replaced by 1,104 illuminating bulbs. But 110 years later, they too were superseded by LED globes that ironically mimic the flicker of candlelight. Beyond the gallery, the extravagance continues through another 1,440 rooms. Decorated with a daunting array of period furniture, thousands of antique clocks, and countless portraits of the Habsburg clan and the events that shaped their dominion. The Black Lacquer Room, once the private study of Emperor Franz Stephan, was remodeled by Maria Theresa after her beloved husband's death. The panels that give the room its name came from the Imperial Manufactory in Peking, while the main portrait on display, a posthumous likeness of Franz Stephan, was commissioned by Maria to complete the memorial to her husband. While most of the rooms in the massive complex are now privately owned or used for official business, 45 are open to all comers, as is the extensive Baroque garden. It opened to the public in 1779, the year before Maria Theresa died. At 1.2 kilometers long and almost 1 kilometer wide, the Great Parterre creates a dramatic central axis, with formal gardens replicated on either side and 32 larger-than-life statues that represent mythological deities and virtues. The most important monument in the regal garden is the Neptune Fountain, which, once again, was commissioned by Maria Theresa. Neptune stands center stage in a shell-shaped chariot, surrounded by an entourage of nymphs, sea goddesses, and tritons, half-man, half-fish creatures from the deep. They are restraining Neptune's seahorses and holding conch shell trumpets, instruments that were sure to instill fear in both man and beast. The whole dramatic sculpture, which took 4 years to complete, references a common motif used by artists during the Renaissance to symbolize a monarch's control over the destiny of their people. Beyond the fountain, sitting at the top of a small hill, is the Gloriette, a magnificent pavilion with a commanding view over the garden. An imperial eagle perched on a globe surrounded by trophies crowns the central section of the structure, which is shaped like a triumphal arch flanked by an open arcade. Looking back towards the palace itself, it serves as both a lookout and focal point for the whole Schönbrunn complex, which, not surprisingly, was granted World Heritage status in 1996. Running the Schönbrunn a close second in the Viennese palace stakes is this, the Hofburg Palace. For over 600 years, the Hofburg served as the official winter residence of the Habsburg sovereigns. And whilst the Habsburgs have been consigned to history, the Hofburg itself holds on to power as the official residence of the serving Austrian president. Yet what draws so many to the Hofburg Palace is neither politicians nor princes. It's ponies. At the center of the 59-acre palace complex is the Winter Riding School. Built between 1729 and 1735 at the request of Emperor Charles VI, the school is still regarded as one of the most prestigious classical riding academies in the world. The school's renown is based on the classical dressage skills of the Lipizzan stallions and their riders. A highlight for visitors to Hofburg who watch from the large spectator gallery encircling the grandiose hall. But die-hard equestrians are just as likely to sign up for a behind-the-scenes tour of the stables. Every saddle hanging in the tack room is tailor-made to suit both horse and rider. And every air-conditioned stall is spotlessly clean. More than fit for the finest team of dancing white horses in Vienna. The riding school has outlasted its Habsburg founders by more than a century, but the school's survival was once a close-run thing. When bombs began raining down on Vienna towards the end of World War II, staff at the riding school braced for the worst. Thanks to the foresight of the then director, the riding hall's principal treasures, its crystal chandeliers and portrait of Charles VI, were relocated for safekeeping, along with the precious stallions themselves. Fortunately, this magnificent building escaped destruction. The horses eventually returned, and the riding school was back into its stride. The bustling street life of modern India is far removed from the prancing horses of the Hofburg. But like its European counterparts, India has crafted its own equally excessive blueprint for the palace. And its showcase is the city of Jaipur. Founded in 1727, Jaipur is renowned for its exquisite palaces. There's the Water Palace, or Jal Mahal, in the middle of the Mansagar Lake. The City Palace, which continues to be the home of Jaipur's royal family, and the incomparable Hawa Mahal, the Palace of the Winds. But the jewel in the Jaipur crown is this, Rambagh Palace. Functioning today as a world-class hotel, the Rambagh Palace sits on a large estate 8 kilometres beyond Jaipur's city walls. Originally built in 1835 as a garden house for the Maharani of Jaipur's favourite handmaiden, the Rambagh was converted into a royal guest house and hunting lodge in 1887. In the early 20th century, it underwent a major transformation, becoming the principal residence of the last ruling Maharaja of Jaipur. The Maharaja was one of several rulers who saw the potential of tourism early, turning Rambagh into a luxury hotel in 1957. Designed in an eclectic mix of styles, it features an extensive marble-floored colonnaded arcade that provides access to the 78 guest suites, a perfectly manicured Mughal courtyard, and the elegant Rajput room, so named for the stylish arches surrounding the windows and feature walls. Complete with 18th century French-style chandeliers, this second dining room was once the palace ballroom and has hosted the likes of Lord Mountbatten, his nephew Prince Charles, and the former First Lady, Jacqueline Kennedy. The Rambagh is no longer the exclusive domain of Indian royalty. As a hotel, it's open to anyone. However, with rooms here costing anything from a few hundred to several $1,000s per night, feeling like a Maharaja costs a king's ransom. But with surroundings like this, it's probably money well spent. Not to be outshone by Jaipur is the city of Jodhpur, 370 kilometres to the west. Standing proud on Jodhpur's skyline is the Umaid Bhwan, a multifaceted palace that functions as a private residence, a luxury hotel, and a museum. Designed by British architect Henry Lanchester in the 1920s, the Umaid Bhwan took 14 years to complete. And it's said that Lanchester and Maharaja Umaid Singh, for whom the palace was built, were inspired by the layout of Hindu and Buddhist temples. Constructed from interlocking sandstone blocks without the use of mortar, the lavish palace was one of the largest royal residences in the world when it opened in 1943. Featuring the same Makrana marble that was used in the iconic Taj Mahal. The palace has 347 rooms, several courtyards, an indoor swimming pool, and a spectacular 31-metre-high vaulted dome. But for all the grandeur the Maharaja created for his family to enjoy, their days in the palace were numbered. Umaid Singh passed away 4 years after the palace was completed. Then his son, Hanwant Singh, was tragically killed in a plane crash. Gaj Singh II, the next successor in line for the throne, ran out of money to maintain the Umaid Bhawan when state subsidies were withdrawn. But Gaj Singh avoided homelessness, retaining a couple of the palace's wings for personal use. By adapting to changing times and circumstances, the palaces of India have managed to stay afloat and open for several centuries. And with architecture that's absorbed many cultural and historical influences, these magnificent icons simultaneously manage to be both global and quintessentially Indian. While India had her Maharajas and Maharanis, and Europe its emperors and empresses, the top titles reserved for Russian royalty were Tsars and Tsarinas. And when it came to flaunting their wealth and extravagance, they were truly in a league of their own. The most famous of all the Russian rulers was Peter the Great, who rose to stardom, expanding the Tsardom into a colossal empire, the third largest in human history. He also established the city of St. Petersburg, which remained the capital of Russia for just over 200 years. Founded in 1703, St. Petersburg heralded a new imperial way of life, renowned at the time for its extravagance. Peter the Great was a great traveller, importing ideas and architects from Europe to help realize his grand design, a city that would, in time, rival the grandest on the planet. The Winter Palace was one of his earliest commissions. A modest building at first, it was almost constantly altered and added to by rulers who followed his lead. Most notably, the Empress Anna, the Tsarina who, in commissioning architect Francesco Bartolomeo Rastrelli, reimagined the palace in its present form. The privileged world of the Tsars came to an abrupt end in 1917, when the Bolsheviks threw open the gates of the Winter Palace and other imperial residences, declaring them the property of the people. Civilians were free to come and go as they pleased, gawping at the lavish interiors and precious artifacts of their former rulers. A situation that appears to have reinvented itself for the Insta generation quite admirably. Today, the Tsarina's giant mint green, white and gold macaron-like confection houses the world-renowned State Hermitage Museum. And despite its robust art collection constantly vying for attention, its interiors still give visitors an impression of how the other half lived back in the day, when the Russians ruled 1/6 of the world. The Jordan staircase in the Winter Palace is a marvel. Just one of 117 flights in the building, but easily the most impressive and one of just a few parts of the structure that retained Rastrelli's 18th century Rococo style. The palace is said to contain 1,500 rooms of varying shapes and sizes. Including the so-called small throne room, the size of which says a lot about Russian royalty's sense of proportion. Like all homeowners, the Russian royals eventually felt the need for a makeover. When Catherine II came to the throne in 1762, she sacked Rastrelli, ditched his Baroque stylings, and introduced a note of neoclassical reserve into the palace's fittings and furnishings. Not that the casual tourist would notice. The Tsarist design mantra clearly remained: too much is never enough. St. Petersburg, or Leningrad as it was then known, was devastated in World War II. This is where one of the most horrific sieges in history took place. A blockade that lasted 872 days. With no food, no heat, no supplies, and no way out, more than 1 million civilians died. Hitler's intention was to wipe Leningrad from the face of the earth through demolitions, but the city refused to surrender. Before retreating, the Nazis looted and destroyed the historical palaces of the Tsars, including this, Catherine Palace, one of the most remarkable palaces ever built. With skill and patience, though, Catherine Palace was eventually restored to its former glory. Like a phoenix rising from the ashes, the glacial blue, gold, and white Catherine Palace is, once more, a wonder to behold. A great deal of what wows the crowds today was rebuilt virtually from scratch in the 1950s, working from architectural plans, photographs, and drawings that had been saved from the city archives prior to the siege by a posse of prudent preservationists and curators. Named after the wife of Peter the Great, Catherine I, who ruled Russia for several years after his death, the palace owes its grandeur to their daughter, Empress Elizabeth. Eager to indulge her pigeon-paired passions, seducing men and spending lots of money, the Empress instructed Rastrelli, who was still the chief architect of the imperial court, to build something that would rival the scale of Versailles. She embellished the exterior of her dream palace with over 100 kilograms of gold, enlivening all the tan sections you see today on the building's facade. The original palace was completed in 1756 and was widely regarded as one of the greatest works of art and architecture from the 18th century. The palace is just as magnificent inside as out, with every detail meticulously recreated for the benefit of the modern world. More than 5,000 artisans were brought together for the post-World War II restoration of the ruin. Reviving long-forgotten techniques in carpentry, gilding, and plastering, they seized the opportunity to pass their skills on to the next generation. They created an icon that not only bears testament to the lavish lifestyle of the imperials, but to their own culture of craftsmanship as well. The Great Hall, also known as the Hall of Light, takes up the full width of the 325-metre-long palace. Its large arched windows allow in just enough light to appreciate the gilded stucco walls and extraordinary fresco. One of the largest ceiling paintings in Europe. It's titled The Triumph of Russia, which, given the fact that it was reproduced in its entirety by a four-man team, could just as easily apply to the restoration project as to the moment in history it depicts. Moving from one room to the next leaves most visitors completely in awe, for Elizabeth's penchant for decadence was both blatant and relentless. Compared to the Great Hall, these stately rooms are relatively compact, but no less luxurious, with many featuring blue and white Hamburg-tiled Baroque stoves in their corners and elaborately patterned parquet floors. Despite each room being surpassed by the next, it's impossible not to be completely overwhelmed by the honey-coloured amber room. Widely referred to as the eighth wonder of the world, the original mosaicked panels were gifted to Peter the Great in 1716 by Frederick of Prussia. Priceless artefacts that were pilfered by the Nazis just before they left St. Petersburg. To this day, their whereabouts remain a mystery, but the replicas that stand in their stead are just as stunning. Using 6 tons of amber, they were reproduced in 2003 for $12 million US. Grand, gobsmacking, and just a teensy bit gaudy, Catherine Palace is the apex of aristocratic architecture, and perhaps goes to prove that with palaces, nothing succeeds quite like excess. Extravagant, extraordinary, and always extremely expensive, palaces have been the playthings and playgrounds of the powerful for centuries. Once the exclusive preserve of royals, ruling classes, and not a few reprobates, palaces are the gilt-edged mirrors of bygone ages, but also a reflection of history's shifting currents. Today, palaces have had to fling open their gates to all comers to both justify their upkeep and ensure their survival. And in doing so, they have established themselves as an enduring part of our world's rich architectural and cultural tapestry. Throughout the ancient world, pyramids were seen as an expression of political power. The rulers that sanctioned their construction were not only able to recruit highly skilled architects and engineers, but organized massive teams of laborers to do all the heavy lifting. The mining and moving of countless tons of stone needed to create the monuments they envisaged. The Mayans, the Aztecs, and before them, the Egyptians, all working for the greater good under the command and direction of their godlike leaders. Every household across ancient Egypt was required to contribute to a pharaoh's pyramid by providing manpower, materials, or food to feed those who labored on its construction. Together, they built the pyramids, and the pyramids helped to build Egypt, the first truly unified nation in history, a civilization that flourished for thousands of years. The sacrifices many individuals made were significant, but in submitting to and fulfilling the ambitions of their rulers, they shared in their quest for immortality, a dream which gave the entire Egyptian society a sense of hope. But the final dynasty of ancient Egypt ended in 30 BCE, when the mighty Romans seized control. The Roman Empire expanded quickly and exponentially, bringing great power, prestige, and wealth to the city of Rome. Regarded at the time as the epicenter of the modern world. To this day, the city boasts an excess of self-aggrandizing monuments that were built to impress, powerful reminders of the ruling elite. The mausoleums of Augustus and Hadrian, the Pantheon, the column of Marcus Aurelius, plus a plethora of public structures and religious icons that were built under papal rule. As the Roman Empire flourished, it expanded into the Middle East, notably taking control in 106 CE of the prehistoric Jordanian city of Petra. Carved into the rugged sandstone cliffs in the middle of the desert, Petra was a thriving center of trade, a tantalizing jewel to add to the Roman Empire's crown. It was established over 2,000 years ago by the Nabateans, a wily group of desert nomads who struck it rich as merchants, gaining control of the movement of spices, textiles, ivory, and incense along the trading routes between Arabia, Egypt, and the Mediterranean Sea. The Nabateans traded freely with the Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans, and as their wealth and status grew, the Nabateans turned the mountains that surrounded them into massive monuments, making Petra the sublime capital and commercial hub of their kingdom. Traders from the east and west passed through Petra for many centuries, bringing ideas that would lead to the city distinguishing itself as a major cultural center of the ancient world. soaring to an all-time high during the Roman era. The Roman influence was evident in the layout of the city and its architecture long before their conquest, and was reflected in the grand colonnades and stairways that led to structures such as the amphitheatre. Built in the 1st century CE, the so-called Great Temple was once the centerpiece of Petra. Although its actual function is still unclear, it may have been a religious building or perhaps a political one, used for administrative purposes. With a majority of the city still to be excavated, there is much for local archaeologists to discover as they seek to learn more about this World Heritage treasure. To date, some of their most significant finds include several elephant-headed capitals and these truly magnificent wall paintings, revealed to the world for the first time in centuries back in 2010. Hailed as one of the most important art finds of the 21st century, the level of detail is stunning. So much so, it's possible to discern the actual species of flowering plants and birds that feature, swirling around a chubby cupid playing a flute. Grapevines, ivy, and vine weed, all associated with the Greek god of wine, have been identified, adorning the walls and vault of a Biclinium, a room where ritual dinners were no doubt held within an area reserved for the elite, some 5 kilometers from the main precinct of the city. As the Romans began to increase their trade by sea, Petra became almost obsolete. Adding insult to injury, the city was rocked by an earthquake in 363 CE, and in the centuries that followed, was lost to the outside world. For Europeans, the city remained unknown until 1812, when Johann Ludwig Burckhardt, a Swiss explorer disguised as a Bedouin, infiltrated the location and was astounded by its splendor. His find soon piqued the interest of archaeologists, architects, and scholars throughout Europe, who paved the way for the fabled city to bolster its fame once more. As overexposed as the icons of Petra have become, they still take the breath away. Hidden at the end of the seductive and sinuous Sikh Canyon, is by far the most popular structure within Petra's orbit, the ethereal Al-Khazna, aka the Treasury. Built between the 5th century BCE and the 1st CE, this 39-meter-high structure was carved out of a single block of stone. There's little to it beyond the facade, a relatively small hall that may have once housed a tomb. The treasury takes its name from a more recent chapter in history. Local Bedouins in the 19th century became convinced that an Egyptian pharaoh had hidden treasures inside the urn on top of the building, which they pockmarked with the bullets they fired at the rock-solid vessel, attempting to release its riches. Today, China is a nation whose star is economically and militarily on the rise. And its power is nowhere more forcefully expressed than in China's capital, Beijing. In Beijing's city center is Tiananmen Square. The square is replete with iconography celebrating the power of the country's ruling regime, the Chinese Communist Party, and its founding father, Mao Zedong. But on the northern edge of Tiananmen Square is the symbol of another powerful Chinese regime. This is the Forbidden City. Built between 1406 and 1420, the Forbidden City was the brainchild of the Ming emperors who ruled China between the 14th and 17th centuries. It served as the imperial power base for a succession of sovereigns and their governments for just under 500 years, and it took a monumental effort to build. A workforce of 1 million took 14 years to construct and decorate the 980 buildings that rise within the 70 palace compounds inside the Forbidden City. The massive stones required for construction were moved during winter so that workers could slide them on ice from where they were quarried to the site of the Forbidden City. The layout of the city was in keeping with Confucian ideology, which still underscores the structure of Chinese society. In accordance with the practice of feng shui, each building in the city followed a south-facing alignment. The color, too, was culturally significant, red being associated with success and vitality, and yellow a symbol of the emperor's ultimate power. The main entrance to the Forbidden City was via the Meridian Gate, so named because the emperors believed their imperial residence to be the center of the cosmos, with a meridian line running right through the middle of their realm. This was as close to heaven as any man or woman could get while still being bound to the earth. A belief that echoes in the names of the three most important sites: the Gate of Heavenly Purity, the Palace of Earthly Tranquility, and between them, the Hall of Celestial and Terrestrial Union, which was used for imperial weddings and important rituals and ceremonies. Then there is the gate to the north called Tiananmen, which gives its name to Tiananmen Square. One of the largest public plazas in the world, Tiananmen Square stands today as a symbol of Chinese power and aspirations. But for many, it's also a reminder of the bravery of ordinary people in the face of excessive power. Around the same time the 6th Ming Emperor was busy settling into the Forbidden City, another great monument was on the rise in the Andean mountains of Peru. This is the citadel of Machu Picchu. Machu Picchu was built around 1450 at the peak of the Incan Empire, a territory that encompassed and unified much of the western half of South America. At the time, the Incan Empire was one of the largest in the world, embracing 10 million people and representing more than 100 different ethnicities. The Incan Empire's expansion was rapid, thanks to the creation of the Great Inca Road, a 40,000-kilometer system of pathways that crisscrossed the forbidding terrain and which was constructed by hand in little more than a century. For all their military prowess, the Incan emperors were best known for ruling a dominion that was prosperous and relatively peaceful. Their religion centered on a pantheon of gods who were honored through the building of shrines and temples, many of which were dedicated to Inti, the sun god, or Viracocha, the creator and divine protector of the 15th century Incan ruler Pachacuti. Machu Picchu is believed by many archaeologists to be Pachacuti's personal royal retreat. Others suggest it's a sacred site based around the worship of the sun. Either way, it needed an entire community of dedicated workers to maintain the sanctuary and cater to the needs of visitors, whether they were blue bloods or wide-eyed pilgrims here to witness the rising or setting of the sun. Without the benefit of iron tools, the Incas constructed over 170 buildings at Machu Picchu. Along with thousands of steps, several temples, and 16 fountains, all engineered with extraordinary precision, a feat made all the more remarkable due to the absence of mortar. The 600 giant stone terraces that also define the site gave the citadel stability, particularly in the event of heavy rains, earthquakes, and landslides. They also created platforms on which the Incas could grow their crops. The Incas were deeply religious people who were fond of precious metals, not so much for their monetary value, but for their spiritual aesthetic. In their world, gold represented the sweat of the sun, and silver, the tears of the moon. And in order to feel more connected to divinity, they amassed one of the largest accumulations of gold in history. It was a legendary collection that ultimately led to their downfall. For it excited a greed that would prove insatiable and merciless. From the early 16th century onwards, Spanish invaders stole Incan territory, authority, and gold, and soon became the foremost empire on earth. To celebrate their conquest, the Spanish, of course, built monuments to their power. The old town of Seville in southwestern Spain still harbors a trio of World Heritage listed monuments that pay tribute to that so-called Golden Age of Spain. Monuments such as the Cathedral of St. Mary, the General Archive of the Indies, and the incomparable Alcazar of Seville, the oldest royal palace still in use in Europe today. The Alcazar showcases a blend of architectural styles that run the full gamut of the site's 1,000-year-long history, from the era of the Caliphate of Cordoba to the present day. Originally developed as a fort in 913 CE, the Alcazar had its first major makeover in the 11th century to accommodate the city's Abbasid rulers and the officers of the state administration. In 1364, when Peter I was the king of Castile and Leon, he added the sumptuous Palacio de Don Pedro, the crowning glory of the Alcazar. Despite being a Christian, Peter I greatly admired the Islamic culture and its architectural heritage, and made sure this predilection was reflected in the exterior and interior design. Peter's long-standing ally, the Emir of Granada, who had earlier built the Alhambra, sent many of his top artisans to work on the Alcazar alongside Christian craftsmen from Toledo and Seville. At the heart of this masterpiece is the Patio of the Maidens. Surrounded by beautiful arches, elaborately decorated with tiling and plasterwork, these sunken gardens were discovered in 2004 having been buried under marble paving since the 16th century. The most spectacular room in the palace is the Hall of the Ambassadors, which was originally built as Peter I's throne room and reception centre. The wooden dome that forms a canopy over the room was added in 1427, long after Peter's death, and its multiple star patterns are said to symbolize the universe. Yet renovations from the 17th to the 20th century emphasized nature as much as architecture. One of the most enjoyable gardens within the complex is the rambling Portal of the Privilege. With its understated pavilion built to honor Charles V, the head of the House of Habsburg, this area, and indeed the whole Alcazar, was a fitting nod to a royal dynasty that would rule vast swathes of the globe for centuries. No doubt envious of the great wealth accumulated by the Spanish, the British decided to crash the colonial party. And one of the most enduring symbols of Britain's imperial power was its prisons. In the conquest of Australia in particular, the British were reliant on convict labour to build its infrastructure, including the prisons that held the convicts themselves. Many examples of these prisons still exist today, including Cockatoo Island convict site in Sydney Harbour, the Port Arthur historic site in Tasmania, and one of the most isolated prisons in the world on Norfolk Island, off the east coast of Australia. This is the Kingston and Arthur's Vale historic area. Here, the Norfolk Island prison was established in March 1788, barely 5 weeks after the British had arrived on mainland Australia. Norfolk was chosen for its remote location and its pine trees and flax, materials used in mast building and sail making, so of huge value to the seafaring British. For its 1,000 convicts, Norfolk was a place of unrelenting labour and brutal discipline. For those who broke prison rules, flogging was a common punishment. In 1845, one convict received a total of 250 lashes, made more painful by the fact that human skin splits after 4 lashes and the spine is exposed after 50. The British had hoped that Norfolk's convicts would also grow food for the settlement in Sydney on the mainland, something the convicts did whilst building all the structures required on the island. Structures like the compounds where convicts were incarcerated, a hospital, the military barracks, offices, cottages, a commissariat store, and a cemetery. Some of the grander Georgian buildings are still in use today, functioning as museums, government administration offices, and homes for public servants seconded to Norfolk from mainland Australia. But the prisons themselves lie in ruins, an evocative reminder of a very dark chapter in the history of colonialism. When Norfolk Island eventually became overcrowded, convicts were relocated to Sydney on mainland Australia. Here, they were put to work building their next prison on Cockatoo Island. Conditions were abominable. Men were permanently in irons. Solitary confinement was frequent, sometimes for weeks. And overcrowding was so severe, a government inspector described prisoners squeezing themselves against barred windows just to breathe. Cockatoo was an amenable site for the British authorities. It was isolated, secure, and easy to provision because it was in Sydney, the fledgling colony's major settlement. A win-win for the British, a no way out for the convicts. For their sins, other unfortunates ended up on an even more isolated island, Tasmania, off the southern coast of Australia. This beautiful island is the location of Port Arthur, one of the most notorious prisons in the British Empire. Port Arthur began life as a convict timber station in 1830, but quickly grew in infrastructure and numbers over the next 20 years, eventually holding over 1,100 prisoners. Sealed off by a narrow neck of land, Port Arthur held repeat offenders from places like Norfolk and Cockatoo Islands. Notable for its cruelty, Port Arthur was largely a labour camp, but the insubordinate were subject to flogging, chaining, solitary confinement, and the most feared punishment of all, sent to work in nearby coal mines, the site of many a death. But aside from physical punishment, Port Arthur also specialised in psychological torture. In 1848, this building was constructed. Known as the Separate Prison, it was designed to reform prisoners through complete isolation and total silence. Pioneered in prisons in England, this so-called silent system involved prisoners spending 23 hours a day in their cells, alone and in total silence. On the rare occasions they left their cells, usually to attend church, prisoners were forbidden to talk and wore hoods to prevent them looking at or being seen by other prisoners. The system was imposed to such a degree that prisoners wore felt slippers over their boots to dampen all and any sound they made. If separation and silence didn't reform a convict, the next step was isolation. Solitary cells in the separate prison were smaller than the usual cells, but just as silent and also completely dark. Incarcerated here for anywhere between a week and a month, prisoners often emerged hallucinating, disoriented, and often so psychologically broken, they were sent to lunatic asylums. Port Arthur was eventually closed in 1877, but not because it was thought too cruel. In 1853, the transportation of criminals to Tasmania ceased, and there were just too few prisoners to make the place economically viable. Today, Port Arthur is one of Tasmania's biggest tourist attractions and remains for all as a symbol of the excesses of power and empire. If the power of an empire was judged solely on the area of land it occupied, then all hail the mighty Tsardom of Russia. Grand masters of the territorial takeover, between 1551 and 1700, the Russian Tsars expanded their dominion by 35,000 square kilometers a year. Today, at around 17 million square kilometers, Russia is the largest country on the planet. Each phase of this federation's epic history is preserved in the architecture of Moscow, the capital city of Russia. 3 of Russia's most iconic monuments are found in the city's historic center. Red Square, or Krasnaya Plozhit, is the heart and soul of not only Moscow, but the entire Russian realm. Contrary to popular belief, the square is not named after the color associated with communism or the wash that adorns many of its buildings. Krasny, in Old Russian, simply means beautiful, only later becoming the word for red. The square, which is actually a 73,000 square meter rectangle, borders the Kremlin, the center of the Russian government. As the front yard of every ruler, from Ivan the Terrible to Vladimir Putin, Red Square has seen more than its fair share of speeches, executions, demonstrations, and parades. It became globally famous during the 20th century as the stage on which the Soviet military regularly demonstrated its superior strength. It's also well known as the final resting place of Vladimir Lenin, the Soviet Union's first leader, whose body has been on display inside this purpose-built granite tomb since 1930. 6 years after his death. The oldest part of Moscow is the Kremlin, with a fortified wall to define the extent of the settlement. The Kremlin expanded over the centuries, with most of the stone walls and towers evident today erected in the late 15th and early 16th centuries. This gives it the sense of being a city within a city, complete with its own squares and cathedrals that have witnessed many of the weddings and coronations of old Russia's ruling elite. To this day, Russian heads of state maintain an office in the Kremlin, although some, like Vladimir Putin, chose to live off-site and commute via helicopter, thus avoiding the horrendous Moscow traffic. By far the most recognizable building in Moscow's historic precinct is St. Basil's, a Russian Orthodox cathedral built in the mid-1500s to commemorate Ivan the Terrible's victories over the independent khanates of Kazan and Astrakhan. Legend has it that Ivan blinded the cathedral's architect, so he would never be able to replicate St. Basil's extraordinary design. The original color of the cathedral was thought to be white, with the domes a lustrous gold. But from the 17th century on, a riot of different pigments added a Disney-like distinction to the building that has ensured its iconic status forevermore. The 9 domes of the cathedral sit above 9 separate chapels and are said to be shaped like the flames of a bonfire rising into the sky. An image which, however fanciful, seems just as fitting within the building as it exudes its ember-like glow. The Russian Revolution in 1917 brought an end to the Tsars and gave birth to the Soviet Union. Joseph Stalin, Soviet leader from the late 1920s onwards, wanted a new architecture to reflect the advent of this new communist regime. This gave rise to a type of architecture known as socialist classicism, or more simply, the Stalinist style. Communists across Europe embraced the genre. But in 1984, the regime in Romania, under the brutal dictatorship of Nicolae Ceausescu, sought to take the Stalinist style to the next level. Currently valued at over 2 billion euros, the Palace of the Parliament building in Bucharest, the capital city of Romania, is the most expensive administration building in the world, and the heaviest. It tips the scales at 4,098,500,000 kilograms, but weighs heavier still on the hearts of the Romanians. Entire neighborhoods were wiped out to make way for the gargantuan monument, including a monastery, a hospital, 37 factories and workshops. 40,000 people lost their homes. And for all the misery and suffering the publicly funded construction caused, it was never actually completed, as Nicolae and his wife Elena Ceausescu were executed for multiple crimes, including the destruction of public property, undermining the national economy, and genocide. It would be reasonable to assume that once the era of empire building flatlined, monumental architecture would also bite the dust. But nothing could be further from the truth. As modern nations began to transition into the new world order, their leaders found the urge to build big as hard to resist as their forebears. As Australia loosened its ties with Britain and inched towards federation, the powers that be decided to build a brand new capital city from scratch. "35 sites were considered, but ultimately the region of Canberra was chosen by Parliament in 1908, essentially because it eschewed the rivalry that existed between two major cities in the country: Sydney to the north, Melbourne to the south. Little more than a decade after Australia became a nation, an international competition was held to design the finest capital city in the world, with American architect Walter Burley Griffin and his wife Marion Mahoney declared the winners in 1912. The centerpiece of their design required the construction of a dam and flooding of a valley to create an artificial lake, around which many of the key public buildings would anchor. A provisional Parliament House was built in 1927, which ended up serving the federal government for the better part of 61 years. With a floor area of 250,000 square meters, its replacement is still one of the largest buildings in the Southern Hemisphere, and an iconic national landmark. Symbolically rising out of its setting on Capitol Hill, rather than imposing itself on the landscape, and by default, the mindset of the people. 10,000 workers spent 7 years constructing and fitting out the gargantuan complex. With with the final price tag coming in at a blistering 1.1 billion Australian dollars, massively exceeding the initial budget of around 150 million. Built to last at least 200 years, this 4,500-room monument to diversity and democracy comfortably accommodates 5,000 politicians and public servants. The design is based on two 460-metre-long curved walls, which separate Parliament House into 4 distinct zones. The House of Representatives and its offices on the eastern side, the Senate and its quarters to the west, an area in the middle which includes ceremonial and public spaces, and the executive government wing to the south. The Grand Entry Plaza, which represents the desert and traditional custodians of the country, leads visitors into an extravagant marble foyer. Topped by marquetry coachwood panels inlaid with designs based on Australian plants, wattles, waratahs and eucalypts that had caught the eye of noted botanist Sir Joseph Banks in 1770. Works of art are integrated into the architecture, a collection that now includes some 7,000 pieces. 25,000 high-quality pieces of furniture were also commissioned for the building, staying true to the ethos that underpins the design and the architect's pragmatic approach. This is Australia's house for the people, built by the people, a monument that celebrates the nation's artisans and a richness of culture that spans the entire human history of the nation. Just as the Federation of Australia was taking shape, America was laying its own foundations for a monumental makeover of its capital city, Washington, D.C. The scope of the work included the reconstruction of numerous public buildings, including the White House and the United States Capitol. To this day, this pair of structures so effectively asserts America's identity and authority, they've earned themselves the honor of Best in Show in the world's greatest icons of power. Rarely a night goes by where they do not feature, for better or worse, on news broadcasts throughout the world.
Of America.
Slowly but surely becoming two of the most readily recognizable structures on the planet. The 132-roomed White House is where the sitting president lives. And over in the west wing of the building is the Oval Office, place where every executive order is signed and therefore where history is made. The West Wing was built in 1902 under President Roosevelt, but the Oval Office wasn't added until 1909. It was rebuilt in 1930 after a fire destroyed it the year before, during Herbert Hoover's presidency. Since the rebuild, every president has decorated the space a little differently, adding busts and portraits of their mentors and political heroes to reflect their goals and how they intend to govern. One piece of furniture, however, has been in service for 140 years, the famous Resolute desk. Prominently featuring in many a photo op over the decades, it was made from the timbers of the British exploration ship HMS Resolute and gifted to President Hayes in 1880 by the British Queen, Victoria. The Capitol building is where Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate have held court for over 200 years, flying the flag to indicate when any or all of the politicians are in session. Sitting at the eastern end of the National Mall, with a commanding view across the reflecting pool to the Washington Monument, the Capitol building has set the stage for the inauguration of many a president. The building has grown with the nation and now boasts over 600 rooms spread across 5 levels. The Great Rotunda in the center of the building beneath the Capitol dome is just under 30 meters in diameter, roughly 2/3 the size of the ancient Roman Pantheon it was intended to recall. In the eye of the rotunda, George Washington rises to the heavens in glory, flanked on either side by allegorical figures that represent liberty and victory. Giving the illusion of a sculptured relief, the circular fresco that sits just below the 36 windows in the dome charts the course of America's history, including its so-called discovery by Columbus, the Revolutionary, Civil, and Spanish-American Wars, and the birth of aviation. Niches around the rotunda frame a series of 8 massive paintings, 4 works that celebrate the exploration and colonization of America, and 4 scenes that capture key moments from the American Revolution, which, in securing independence from the British, led to the creation of the United States and the first modern democracy in the world. To the immediate south of the rotunda is the semicircular National Statuary Hall, which was, until 1857, the chamber for the House of Representatives. Shaped like an ancient Greek amphitheater, its colossal marble columns were quarried from the banks of the Potomac River, but the Corinthian-style capitals they support were carved in Carrara, Italy. In 1864, Congress invited each state of America to contribute to a collection of statues representing prominent citizens from their electorates. There are 100 in all, but for lack of space, only 38 are on display. The Capitol dome is crowned by the Statue of Freedom, her crested helmet and sword suggesting the protection the authorities within endeavor to afford their constituents. She faces east, some say in the direction of Great Britain, as a subtle post-independence taunt, while others believe she's positioned that way so the sun never sets on the face of freedom. From the beginning of human civilization, buildings have been intimately linked with power. Sometimes grand in scale, always oozing confidence. These buildings speak of great ambition, untrammeled vanity, and all too often, great cruelty as well. These extraordinary icons allow us to glimpse the rise and fall of great empires, the ebb and flow of wealth, and the waxing and waning of ideologies. If these icons hold any lesson for us, it is that however mighty the powerful may seem, power never lasts forever. For millennia, town planners, civil engineers, and civic architects have been trying to strike a perfect balance between form and function, creating spaces and places that not only resonate and surprise, but serve a purpose too. The rulers of ancient Rome were renowned for the grandeur of the buildings they commissioned. In particular, they took a keen interest in buildings designed for entertainment. Buildings like the Circus Maximus, the go-to venue for fans of chariot racing, athletics, and homicidal gladiators. For the artistically inclined, there were places like the 5,000-seater Teatro Grande in Pompeii, which staged theatrical productions. The rulers liked these buildings because they showcased their wealth and power, and just as importantly, distracted an unruly public. Better to have amused masses than a bloodthirsty mob. These buildings also had a geopolitical purpose. What better way for the Roman Empire to impress its subjects than with an impressive piece of civic architecture? A philosophy the Romans exported throughout their empire. About 50 kilometers north of the Jordanian capital of Amman is one of the best preserved examples of Roman architecture outside of Rome. It's called Jerash. Jerash was all but completely destroyed by an earthquake in 749 CE, and what remained lay hidden under the sands of the Arabian desert until 1806, when it was unearthed by German explorer Ulrich Jasper Sietzen. Once restored, Jerash was recognized as one of the most impressive civic spaces in the Roman Empire. Notable is Hadrian's Gate. Built to honor the inaugural visit of the Emperor Hadrian in the 2nd century CE, the gate was the entrance to a city dominated by avenue after avenue of stone columns. Columns lined Jerash's streets, defined its temples, and most spectacularly encircled the oval-shaped forum or public square, where people gathered to trade, gossip, and network. The Forum is one of the ancient world's great civic innovations, and the Forum at Jerash is a fine example. Jerash's main drawcard, though, was the Hippodrome. The word hippodrome derives from the Greek word hippo for horse. So it's no surprise that the Hippodrome at Jerash was primarily the site of chariot racing. And it was very popular too. As many as 15,000 Bejing spectators would ring the Hippodrome's 265-metre-long track. And once the chariots had run their race, the northern part of the Hippodrome was turned over to gladiatorial combat. If chariots didn't appeal, there was always the Jerash Amphitheatre, meaning theatre on both sides. This amphitheatre held an audience of 5,000 in its 32 rows of stone seats and staged everything from plays to mime to song and dance spectacles, something which still persists today. In Roman times, the building itself was something of a spectacle. Although based on the Greek model, the Roman amphitheatre was more advanced. Greek amphitheatres were usually built into a hill, but the Roman model was self-supporting and fully enclosed, meaning it could hold more people and the acoustics were much better. As architecture, Jerash is a statement piece. Through its civic buildings, the Romans are telling the people of Jerash who's in control, but also that there are benefits to being controlled. When it comes to iconic civic buildings of the Roman era, the daddy of them all is surely in Rome itself, the Coliseum. "190 meters in length and 155 meters wide, the Colosseum was commissioned by Emperor Vespasian around 70 to 72 CE and opened to great acclaim in 80 CE. Designed as a sports and entertainment complex, the Colosseum was fashioned from travertine limestone, volcanic rock, and concrete faced with brick. But as with Jerash, the real point of the Colosseum was to show the 50,000 spectators who was in charge. The Colosseum was highly segregated. Of the 80 entry points, 76 were for the public. And of the remaining 4, 1 was for gladiators, but the other 3 were for the exclusive use of the emperor and members of Rome's elite. The Colosseum was civic architecture as social stratification. The so-called entertainment was varied, from gladiatorial contests to battle reenactments to plays, but the main game was always power. One event, Venationis, a spectacle featuring the slaughter of animals, was very popular, but very expensive to mount, so would serve to highlight the wealth of those who generously sponsored it. Occasionally, criminals were publicly executed here, sometimes crucified or attacked by wild beasts. A warning to onlookers of what happens to those who didn't toe the Roman line. For all its savagery and social inequality, the Colosseum did bestow something of lasting civic value. A blueprint for the modern sports stadium. A blueprint which has been replicated throughout the world. One of the oldest stadiums still in use today is in London, the capital of England. This is Lord's Cricket Ground. Founded by Thomas Lord in 1787, Lord's Cricket Ground, or Lord's for short, is the home of English cricket. As the birthplace of mass spectator sports like cricket, football and rugby, England was always the likeliest venue for a revival of the stadium, none of which had been built since the decline of the Roman Empire. The idea of Lord's emerged in 1787, but it was only in 1812, after a few changes of location, that Lord's settled on its present site. And it wasn't until 1867 that the stadium started to resemble a stadium, with the construction of a 9-metre-high, 53-metre-long grandstand, which, clearly inspired by ancient Roman elitism, also featured a private box for the Prince of Wales. Since then, Lord's has grown into an impressive sporting arena and the spiritual home of English and world cricket. The site is also home to the world's oldest sporting museum. Housed in the former rackets court, the collection was established in 1864 and includes a wealth of cricketing memorabilia. Including a bat signed by Australian cricketer Donald Bradman, who has the highest average score of any cricketer in history. But the most esteemed item in the collection is the Ashes urn, which symbolically commemorates England's first cricketing loss to Australia in 1882. Granted, at 10.5 centimetres, the urn's stature is a little surprising. But make no mistake, among those who have followed the century-old cricketing rivalry between England and Australia, its status is nothing short of iconic. Museums play an important role in the civic life of many societies. They spark curiosity, inspire self-reflection, and, in a very tangible way, bring us face to face with bygone times and cultures. And no more so than here in Cairo, the capital of Egypt. Amongst the largest cities in Africa, Cairo is a confluence of many cultures and many pasts. Although a modern metropolis, its architecture and culture still bear the stamp of earlier Roman, Arabic, and Turkish influences. But there is a deeper past in Cairo too, one that's found here at the Cairo Museum. The Cairo or Egyptian Museum, to give it its formal name, is an invaluable repository of antiquities from Egypt's foundational civilization. Opened in 1902, the museum holds over 100,000 ancient Egyptian artifacts dating from as early as 5000 BCE. The star of the collection is the boy pharaoh Tutankhamun, who ruled Egypt from the age of 9 until his death at the age of 19 in 1324 BCE. Included in the Tutankhamun collection is the golden chariot he may have been riding when he sustained the injury that ultimately killed him, and his 3 sarcophagi, which would have fitted snugly inside one another like a set of Russian dolls. Other significant treasures include the model of the boat he would have used to transport him into eternity, and these marble canopic jars that contain his 4 vital organs, which would have been removed prior to the mummification of his body, and his exquisite gold throne, the back of which is adorned by a relief featuring King Tut with his royal wife and half-sister Ankhesenamun, who may have initially been married to her own father, a commonplace practice among the ancient royal families of Egypt. Time itself has caught up with this extraordinary time capsule. The museum is no longer fit for purpose, and so the collection is moving to a more modern site. Intentionally, the new site is right next to the pyramids of Gizeh, whose ancient legacy the original Cairo Museum has done so much to preserve. As human civilization has developed and grown, so too have its museums. In Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States, is the world's largest museum, the Smithsonian Institution. Founded in 1846, the Smithsonian is actually made up of 19 museums, 16 of which are in Washington, D.C., with 2 more on the way. The Smithsonian was the brainchild of James Smithson, a chemist and mineralogist who was deeply passionate about science and bequeathed his estate to the country for the increase and diffusion of knowledge. And to this day, in accordance with Smithson's wishes, entry to each and every museum is free of charge. The Museum of Natural History is a perennial favourite, attracting between 4 and 5 million visitors a year. Here, the public can explore how the Earth was formed billions of years ago and how it evolved through time to become a cradle of life. Each and every exhibit is designed to spark curiosity and shed light on the rich diversity of our planet. The Museum of American History near the Washington Monument houses an eclectic collection of memorabilia. Everything from the red slippers Dorothy wore in The Wizard of Oz to Abraham Lincoln's stovepipe hat and the portable desk that Thomas Jefferson used when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. The latter items are located in a large exhibition space that celebrates the glorious burden of the American presidency. The personal, public, and ceremonial lives of the leaders who, over the centuries, have helped shape the national narrative. By far the most popular exhibition under the Smithsonian's care is the National Air and Space Museum, which has dozens of aircraft on display, including the original 1903 Flyer designed by the Wright brothers to introduce powered, heavier-than-air flight to the world. Several rooms within the museum celebrate America's history of space exploration. In the Boeing Milestones of Flight Hall, visitors clamour for a chance to touch a slice of the moon. A sliver of rock procured during the Apollo 17 mission in 1972, the last time humans travelled beyond low Earth orbit. In the Apollo to the Moon display, there's a pressure suit worn by Neil Armstrong on the Apollo 11 mission, and various helmets and gloves worn by his off-sider, Buzz Aldrin. There's also, kind of creepily, the preserved remains of Abel, the rhesus monkey who was one of America's first spacefarers. It's difficult to say what this collection of artifacts is worth. Harder still to put a price on their value, as they continue to inspire each generation to literally reach for the stars. Humanity's need to be close to nature can never be overstated, particularly in the midst of the urban jungles we've built to accommodate our lives. By 2050, 68% of the global population will be living in cities. But beyond the very basic provision of residential and office space, water and power, cities need art and culture to lift the spirit, and nature to nurture the soul. One of the oldest forms of civic green space found in cities all over the world is the botanical garden. The first was created in Padua in Veneto, Italy, in 1545, and remains to this day an inspiration for others. influencing not only their layout and design, but the scientific disciplines upheld within their realm: the study of botany, ecology, medicine, and pharmacology. In the 19th century, glass houses became a popular fixture in botanical gardens and scientific institutions throughout the world. The cost of glass at the time made them a luxury few individuals could afford, so they carried a lot of status even in the civic realm. They allowed scientists to grow all manner of exotic and native plants in temperature-controlled environments, initially for research purposes, but eventually to showcase the regal splendor that existed in the kingdom of plants. And with it, a civic space of unparalleled beauty and public utility began to blossom. With advances in technology, the design of glass houses has undergone a steady but radical evolution. And none is more innovative or eye-catching than a pair of glass houses found in the city-state of Singapore. This is Gardens by the Bay, a 250-acre theme park for the horticulturally inclined. And it's smack bang in the middle of one of the most intensely urban cities on our planet. Costing a smidge under $1 billion US, there are two separate glass houses. The first is the Flower Dome, reputedly the largest glass greenhouse on the planet. Covering an area 3 times the size of a football field, the column-free grid shell and arch structure was designed by an interdisciplinary team of local and international architects and opened to the public in 2012. Sitting alongside the Flower Dome is the taller, some say better-looking sibling, the Cloud Forest Dome. In a fitting acknowledgement of their truly dazzling beauty inside and out, the domes won the award for the best display building at the 2012 World Architectural Festival, while the whole garden complex landed the site the highest global honor, the prestigious World Building of the Year. The Flower Dome boasts well over 1 million plants and flowers arranged according to the continent and biome they represent. The entire display is a tribute to the army of green fingers, charged with keeping them alive in an artificial environment. Everything from a 1,000-year-old olive tree transplanted from the Mediterranean to these handsome cacti, which prefer their surroundings hot and dry. Next door, and replicating an environment at altitude, the Cloud Forest Dome is completely dominated by a 42-meter-high mountain, complete with its own waterfall. It's liberally covered in plants that thrive in a cooler climate, reproduced by air conditioning and a mist machine. On a hot, steamy day in Singapore, there are fewer cooler places to be, ambling along the suspended walkways that go around and through the plant-clad behemoth. Beyond the domes, the rest of the park is open to the elements, including this futuristic grove of 18 super trees, which are also connected by a skywalk hovering 22 meters above the ground. Inspired by the mighty Kari trees of southwestern Australia and the fantasy forest Studio Ghibli created for their anime film Princess Mononoke, The tallest super tree soars as high as a 16-story building, the shortest, half that size. Their trunks are made from reinforced concrete, cocooned in a steel frame that supports a living skin of around 159,000 epiphytes, tropical climbers, ferns, orchids and bromeliads. One serves as an air exhaust system for the domed conservatories, while 11 others are fitted with solar photovoltaic cells so they light up at night. Never is a green sanctuary needed more than in the middle of a high-density urban metropolis. Tokyo takes the podium as the most populated city in the world. It's estimated that the larger metropolitan area is home to over 36 million people. That's 1/4 of Japan's entire population. Parks become an essential civic space in jam-packed cities, providing welcome respite from the congestion of urban life. In Tokyo, this respite is provided by Yoyogi Park. Featuring stretches of forested areas, wide lawns and ponds, Yoyogi Park is frequented by locals who stroll the tree-lined walking paths and picnic on the lawns. Adjacent to Yoyogi Park, the sacred Meiji Shrine is enveloped by the wider forested area. The entrance to Meiji Shrine is marked by a torii, a traditional Japanese gate, which symbolically marks the transition from the mundane to the sacred. Venturing into this space offers visitors a deeper, more spiritual experience, now worlds away from the hustle and bustle of Tokyo streets. At the purification font, flowing water is traditionally used in a ritual to cleanse the hands and mouth, and in doing so, purify the mind and body. This takes place at the entrance to the shrine before praying to deities. The shrine buildings sit within the inner precinct of the main sanctuary. Meiji Shrine is dedicated to the deified spirits of Emperor Meiji and Empress Shoken. The shrine was built in a traditional Shinto architectural style, primarily made with Japanese cypress and copper. The building of the shrine was a national project, mobilizing youth groups and other civic associations from across the country who contributed labor and donated funding. 200 traditional sake barrels were also donated to the shrine by sake breweries across Japan as a sacred offering to the Emperor Meiji. The Meiji Shrine, together with Yoyogi Park, occupy one of the largest expanses of greenery in Tokyo. In the hands of a property developer, the area would be worth billions of real estate dollars. But these spaces have been carved out for the civic good, which goes to show the inherent value civic parks hold. A recreational space to unwind and reflect is priceless. Across Japan, another civic park was born of a need for deep reflection. One so poignant that it permeates to humanity worldwide. The Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park, like other green spaces, offers city dwellers some respite from busy urban life. But this park is also a memorial to the victims of an unprecedented nuclear attack. On August 6, 1945, at 8:15 a.m., the United States forces dropped an atomic bomb on the city of Hiroshima. Tens of thousands were killed on impact, and along with victims of the fallout in subsequent months, over 140,000 people were killed. The memorial park sits at the epicenter of the bomb site. What was once the city's busiest commercial and residential district became a field of rubble after the explosion hit. One building remained partially intact and has been preserved as the Peace Park's primary landmark. Formerly an industrial promotion hall, post-war, the building was renamed the Atomic Bomb Dome. The dome was the closest building to the bomb's hypocenter and is thought to have stayed standing because the force of the blast came from above, sparing the solid stone and steel structure. The damaged facade, complete with piles of debris, have been preserved as a sobering reminder of the horror of nuclear weapons. Atomic bomb survivors and Hiroshima residents see the dome as representing humanity's pledge for peace. Another important memorial in the park is the Children's Peace Monument, a statue built in memory of the thousands of children who died as a result of the bombing. It commemorates the story of one such child, Sadako Sasaki, who was 2 years old at the time of the blast and contracted leukemia as a result of the radiation. Throughout her long illness, Sadako's goal was to fold 1,000 paper cranes before dying at the age of 10. Today, the origami paper crane has become a universal symbol for the pursuit of peace. Another symbolic gesture in the park is the peace flame. The flame was lit in 1964 and has burned continuously since that time. The peace flame will remain lit in the Hiroshima Memorial Peace Park until the planet is free of nuclear weapons. The park and its memorials attract over 1 million visitors each year, suggesting that its plea for world peace is a sentiment shared by citizens worldwide. The urge to be close to nature is well established in our city's parks, but there is another civic space which also speaks to this urge: the zoo. There are over 10,000 zoos and aquariums in the world today, providing citizens from all walks of life with a chance to connect to animals they might otherwise never meet in the wild. Zoos have their origins in the royal menageries of the ancient Egyptians in about 2,500 BCE and were an expression of a ruler's power to exhibit exotic animals captured in conquered lands. Today's zoos echo these early royal menageries, but have evolved to become civic spaces serving a completely different function. In the harbourside suburb of Mosman in Sydney, Australia, stands one of the Southern Hemisphere's most impressive zoos. Taronga Zoo, which stands on land originally owned by the indigenous Kameregal people, has been operating for over a century. The first exhibits to be built included the seal ponds and elephant temple. and the grand entrance to the zoological gardens, which is still in use today. The Giraffe House was added in 1923, and its inmates still have one of the best views in Sydney, barely even having to crane their necks to enjoy the vista. As far as civic architecture goes, the design of this zoo is in a league of its own, for it must meet two often conflicting criteria: the needs of the animals and those of the visiting public. At Taronga, the enclosures in most instances don't have any bars. Potentially dangerous primates are separated by moats cleverly worked into the landscaping, or transparent barriers that permit an uninterrupted view. There are over 5,000 animals in Taronga today, representing over 350 species, many of them endangered or threatened in the wild. Through their observations and scientific study, the team at Taronga are constantly discovering new and remarkable things about the creatures they protect and the ecosystems that support their cousins in the wild. As with any great civic institution, Taronga is constantly evolving, upgrading, and refining their infrastructure, and finding new ways to stay relevant to the public. They are making the most of the trend towards more interactive exhibits, which allow people of all ages to engage directly with the animals and, one hopes, their conservation message. The open concept underpinning the philosophy and design of contemporary zoos reaches its peak in Singapore. Singapore Zoo is home to well over 2,400 animals, representing more than 300 species, 34% of which are under threat in their native habitats. Here, the animals lucky enough to call this their home live in spacious, landscaped environments that are as close to the real deal as it gets. The free orangutan habitat attempts to replicate, to some degree, the ape's original environment in the rainforests of Borneo and Sumatra. This space allows parents to pass on skills to their young, useful for bonding and survival should they be released back into the wild. Whilst zoos are clearly not nature on its own terms, they do offer urbanites an opportunity to get closer to nature. And with that comes the possibility of a greater understanding of the environment and a greater sense of compassion for all creatures, great and small. For humans, water is an intrinsic part of who we are. Up to 60% of our body weight is comprised of water, and adult humans require an average of between 2 and 3 litres of water per day to survive. For cultural, economic and recreational purposes, we are drawn to water in the shape of our rivers and our oceans. In our civic buildings too, water features prominently. And nowhere more so than here in Budapest, the capital of Hungary. Budapest is home to the Széchenyi thermal baths, the largest mineral-rich baths in Europe. Conceived in 1896 to honour Hungary's 1000th birthday, the Széchenyi baths still draw the crowds. Renowned for their medicinal properties, the baths now boast 18 public pools, 3 of which are associated with the on-site hospital, which naturally enough specialises in balneotherapy, the use of spring water for the prevention and treatment of disease. Architecturally, the baths are largely neo-Baroque and neo-Renaissance in style. The cupola room is richly decorated with mosaics that depict the role of water through human history, and the gods and goddesses associated with its rich mythology. The 3 outdoor pools are favoured by locals, particularly those who like to train their brains while their bodies are rejuvenating. Popularised during the communist era, chess has become a passionate pursuit among the Hungarian populace. But here, competitors can literally immerse themselves in the game. Spaces providing a setting for social interaction have taken myriad forms over the millennia. Yet one of the most enduring and often overlooked civic spaces is the library. In Athens, the capital of Greece, is one of the oldest and most significant libraries in the ancient world, the Library of Hadrian. Founded by the Roman Emperor Hadrian in 132 CE, the library served as a repository for sacred writings and archives. Known originally as the University of Athens, the library's books weren't books as we know them today, but papyrus rolls, a type of paper developed by the Egyptians, adopted by the Greeks, and used extensively in the Roman Empire. The library was one of the largest buildings commissioned during the reign of Emperor Hadrian, which clearly speaks to its importance as both a centre of civic life and a centrepiece of civil society. In the early Western world, the greatest librarians of all were Christian monks. From the medieval period onwards, monks in Britain and Europe established some of the most learned and active libraries since the days of the ancient Greeks and Romans. "77 kilometers west of the Austrian capital of Vienna is the tiny town of Melk. Towering above the town is the imposing form of Melk Abbey, which contains one of the most valuable libraries in Europe. The library sits in the middle of a Benedictine abbey, which was established in the 11th century and completed in the 18th. The oldest and rarest books in the library's collection are held under lock and key, in glass display cases throughout the main room. The room is 2 stories high and crowned by a magnificent ceiling fresco painted by Paul Trégère, beneath which the walls of the entire lower floor are lined with shelving to hold 16,000 leather-bound volumes. Melk's collection includes, as might be expected for an abbey, several antique Bibles and prayer books. But it also includes some oddities, most notably The Rose Thorn, a risque 13th century poem in which a woman holds a dialogue with her genitalia. The second floor holds an assortment of scientific books, including a natural history collection, while smaller adjoining rooms house the remainder of the Abbey's 100,000 books and manuscripts. But Melk is no museum. As a functioning library, it still welcomes scholars from all over the globe to study its prized possessions. Libraries are devoted to serving the public through the transmission of knowledge. And no library throws open its doors with as much gusto as one of Europe's oldest and most famous. In Dublin, the capital of Ireland, is the very Harry Potter-esque Trinity College Library. Situated in the grounds of Trinity College, the library is home to some 6 million items, including significant icons of Irish culture, such as the 1916 proclamation of the Irish Republic and the Book of Kells, an illuminated manuscript of the 4 Christian Gospels, reputedly dating from the 8th century. The main chamber of the old library, or long room as it's known, was built in 1712 during the Georgian era. But as the library's collection expanded, the roof was raised and a second floor added in 1858. At nearly 65 meters long, it now holds around 200,000 of the oldest books in the library, and an impressive collection of marble busts of various dignitaries associated with the library and notable philosophers and writers of the Western world. Trinity, like many libraries, is a beautiful civic structure. But a library's real beauty lies in what it represents. Humanity's unquenchable thirst for knowledge, its respect for learning, and its endless quest for illumination. For centuries, civic spaces have been the cornerstones of our cities and our cultures. They are places of entertainment, expressions of power. They are windows into what we once were, who we are, and what we aspire to be. Civic spaces also offer us the opportunity to rejuvenate, to reconnect, to reflect. And with our cities destined to become more and more crowded, civic spaces have a role in reminding us that cities are not just about commerce or accommodation. They are about us.